The laughter echoed like breaking glass across the snowfield. He lay face down, cheek pressed to the ice, tasting metal and failure. Above him, on the ridge, the alien stormtroopers laughed, sharp, synthetic bursts of mockery, filtered through helmets rimed with frost. One of them kicked his rifle downhill. The weapon tumbled, barrel first, cutting small spirals in the powder before stopping inches from his outstretched glove. They thought he was beaten. They were almost right. He forced one breath, then another. The cold wasn't what hurt. It was the sound of them laughing at his men. He could still see the valley floor 2 nights ago, red flares bursting like dying suns, his squad scattered in the snow. They had died fast, bravely, stupidly. Now he was the last one left, the old one, the ghost they had forgotten to finish. He watched through a veil of frost as the stormtroopers mocked his fallen team, their laughter brittle in the thin mountain air. Their armor gleamed faintly even in the dim winter light, designed for domination, not survival. Beneath those angular plates were circulatory regulators meant to balance body heat. But they were not made for this climate, not for Earth's frozen teeth. Tiny threads of condensation crawled down the lenses of their helmets, freezing as they spoke. He noticed that detail, small, easy miss, but important. The frost was forming inside the helmets. Their superiority was starting to crack. He shifted slightly, pain flashing up his side where a fragment of shrapnel had lodged the night before. The motion sent a small flurry of powder into the air. One of the aliens turned toward him, raised a weapon lazily, and fired into the snow beside his leg. The energy pulse hissed and steamed, melting a shallow crater. More laughter followed. He didn't move again. He just stared at the rifle, so close that he could see his reflection distorted along the frozen metal. The stormtroopers began to descend the ridge, arrogant in their victory. They hadn't checked for survivors. They didn't care. To them, this was sport. Human soldiers were prey, interesting only until they stopped moving. He remembered when they had first landed, calling themselves the Korth Dominion. The media said negotiation was possible. His platoon learned otherwise in the first week. He blinked through the ice forming on his lashes and let his thoughts narrow to the rifle. The weapon wasn't just steel and carbon fiber. It was memory. It was the last thread connecting him to his squad. He reached out slowly, every movement deliberate. The frost cracked along his sleeve as he extended his arm, fingers numb and sluggish. The wind shifted then, carrying the smell of oil and alien coolant. The laughter above faltered. They had noticed. He stopped breathing. For a long second, the forest was silent except for the faint drip of melting icicles. Then a new sound came, a sharp, crystalline crack from above. He glanced up just enough to see one of the stormtroopers scrape frost off his visor. The motion left a smear of moisture that instantly froze again. Inside the visor, faint tendrils of ice spidered outward. They didn't see it, but he did. A thin smile formed beneath his beard. The mountain wasn't theirs. The cold wasn't theirs. This was his element. Every flake, every gust, every shard of ice was his ally now. He reached the rifle and wrapped his glove around the grip. The aliens resumed laughing, ignorant of what was coming. He steadied himself, breath slow, vision clear. The humiliation burned away, replaced by focus sharper than the cold. They thought they had buried a man. What they had buried was patience. The wind shifted once more, aligning perfectly downrange. He adjusted the scope, watched frost form on the lens, and whispered to the silence, "Let's begin." He steadied the rifle against the snowbank, letting the cold bite into his gloves until sensation blurred into instinct. The stormtroopers were still lingering on the ridge, their silhouettes wavering through the crystalline haze rising from their malfunctioning armor. He watched them through the scope, noting how their movements had become jerky, impatient. The temperature was sinking, and their suits were losing the battle. He could use that. He had to. The shot he planned wasn't meant to kill. Not yet. It was meant to change the terrain, to turn the mountain itself into a weapon. He shifted his aim upward, past the stormtroopers, and toward the jagged overhang they had been too arrogant to consider a threat. Snow clung to the ledge in a sculpted mass, frozen together by nights of sub-zero storms. Beneath it, he could see the faint shimmer of a thin ice sheet, just brittle enough to be coaxed, just heavy enough to matter. His finger tightened on the trigger. For a moment, he thought of his squad again, not in pain, but in the warmth of memory. They had joked that he was married to the mountains. The old man who could smell a blizzard an hour away. The one who knew how to track by shadows. They used to tease him about his silence, but they trusted it. He had never needed many words to command respect. Now, their voices existed only in the wind curling through the trees, and if he let that wind die, the ridge would remain owned by the monsters who had torn everything from him. His jaw tightened. The mountain wasn't finished with him yet. He exhaled slowly and fired. The recoil nudged his shoulder, but it was the sound, an echoing crack, sharp and hollow, that told him the plan had worked. The bullet struck the ledge, splitting the ice in a quick, luminous fracture. A rumble followed, like distant thunder. The stormtroopers stiffened, lifting their heads as a sheet of jagged ice and compacted snow broke loose above them. Their laughter vanished. The avalanche that came wasn't a roaring wall, but a slicing cascade of crystalline shards, falling in a glittering storm. The shards hit their helmets with a chorus of metallic chimes, each strike forming new fractures in the already stressed visors. The troopers staggered, some slipping, others swatting instinctively at the steam venting from their joints. One reached up to wipe the visor and froze as the smear instantly turned to white frost that spidered across his field of view. Panic rippled through the group like a pulse. He adjusted the scope, watching them devolve from confident hunters into confused animals trapped by their own technology. Their suits were built for structured urban warfare, not this unpredictable wilderness. The regulators inside their helmets were miscalculating ambient temperature, overcorrecting and then freezing shut. He saw one claw at the seal around his jawline, breath fogging the interior like a sealed jar left in a blizzard. Another stumbled toward the extraction beacon strapped to his shoulder, only to find its light flickering weakly. They were unraveling, one mistake at a time. He couldn't afford sympathy. The memory of his squad's bodies half buried in the snow steadied him. These troopers had recorded their deaths, had replayed them for amusement. Whatever fear they felt now was a fraction of what they had sown. He slid further behind a fallen log, snow whispering around him as he repositioned. His breath formed a steady rhythm. Inhale, exhale, focus. The stormtroopers regrouped clumsily, scanning the trees for an enemy they thought they understood. They had no idea how close he was. The wind shifted again, colder, sharper, aligning itself with him like an old companion. This was just the beginning, and he could feel the momentum turning. The ridge was no longer theirs. It belonged to the cold and to him. He moved with the slow certainty of a predator reclaiming familiar ground, each step measured to avoid disturbing the brittle crust beneath the snow. The stormtroopers had shifted from confusion to dread, their formation breaking into jagged fragments as they descended the ridge in disarray. Through the trees, he tracked their silhouettes, glimmering shapes distorted by steam and fractured visors. Their armor still gleamed, but the confidence that once animated them had drained away. Their breaths rasped audibly, amplified by the helmets that were now turning against them. He understood that sound. It was the noise soldiers made when they realized the rules had changed. He crouched behind a thick pine trunk and steadied his rifle along a branch coated in delicate frost. He aimed not at torsos, but at branches, rocks, and shards of ice, elements the stormtroopers didn't understand, but he had long ago learned to read like script. A single shot ricocheted off a frozen limb, striking a trooper's visor at an oblique angle. The helmet didn't shatter outright. Instead, the impact deepened existing fractures until the visor collapsed inward with a crystalline shriek. The trooper's scream was lost in the wind, his armored form collapsing into the snow as the cold rushed inside. The others halted, their panic sharpening into something feral. He shifted position before they could pinpoint the shot. The forest welcomed his silence, absorbing him into its stillness. He moved from tree to tree, leaving only faint impressions that the wind quickly erased. The stormtroopers' boots crunched loudly as they advanced, their coordination deteriorating. Their sensors flickered erratically, unable to distinguish branches from threats. He could hear their stilted, filtered voices crackle through damaged comms, short bursts of static punctuated by clipped commands spoken in their guttural dialect. They were afraid. Good. Fear clouded judgment, and he needed them blind. Sliding behind a fallen log, he retrieved an alien energy cell left in the snow by the trooper whose helmet had collapsed. It pulsed faintly in his glove, heat radiating like a trapped ember. He set it gently beneath a mound of powder. As it melted the snow, a plume of steam rose, drifting between the trees like a ghostly curtain. The stormtroopers jerked toward it, startled, their weapons raised. He watched their sensors flare hot, misclassifying the steam as a fast-moving target. They opened fire, the blasts hissing through the vapor and lighting the forest with erratic flashes. Using their distraction, he flanked them, his footsteps matching the rhythm of their frantic movements. Another shot rang out, striking a nearby rock. The controlled ricochet chipped through his second visor. He watched the trooper stagger, arms flailing as he dropped to one knee. The helmet's structural integrity gave way, and the visor burst outward like frozen glass under a hammer. A plume of frost expelled from the opening, followed by silence. For a brief moment, he saw the remaining troopers through their own eyes, trapped in failing armor on an alien world, hunted by a single human who refused to die. They had expected compliance, not defiance. They had expected prey, not resolve. Their training had not prepared them for a man who knew the land better than their machines ever could. He circled them again, keeping his breath steady. They were down to two now, both scanning wildly, their visors spiderwebbed with fractures that pulsed faintly with each mechanical breath. The steam for the energy cell reached them in drifting waves, obscuring their aim. They backed toward each other instinctively, shoulders touching. He could hit it quickly, but speed wasn't the point. This wasn't about vengeance alone. It was about balance, restoring what had been broken, giving the mountain back its voice. He raised the rifle again, settling the crosshairs over the nearest visor. The cold deepened around him, the forest holding its breath. The shot he prepared now would leave only one trooper standing, and that survivor would carry the weight of the moment. He inhaled, steady and calm, knowing the mountain was with him. The final two stormtroopers clung to each other with the desperation of creatures who finally understood they were prey. Their helmets flickered with internal frost, each breath turning the visors wider, narrower, more suffocating. He watched them from the shadow of a leaning pine, the rifle steady against his cheek. His pulse was calm, but his thoughts were sharper than the cold. He could see his squad's faces in the snow, not as ghosts, but as reminders, men and women who had believed in him, trusted him, followed him. Their absence carved a quiet resolve in his chest that no amount of enemy laughter could crack. He shifted slightly, aligning the crosshairs with the right trooper's visor. The shot split the air like a clean tear in fabric. The bullet struck the weakened visor with a muted crystalline pop, sending the trooper stumbling backward. His companion lurched forward, reaching out, but his gloved hand closed on nothing. The shattered helmet spilled a burst of frost as the body fell sideways into the snow. The surviving trooper froze, trembling. His breath echoed inside the helmet like a trapped animal's whine, distorted and panicked. For a moment, neither of them moved. The forest around them was still, reverent. The sniper emerged from the trees with deliberate slowness, boots whispering across the powder. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't need to. The trooper turned to face him, hands lifted in a hesitant approximation of surrender. His visor was fractured so badly that only one sliver of dark glass remained intact, hiding the alien's eyes. Steam leaked from the broken seams, forming thin white ribbons that curled in the frigid air. The alien's voice filter sputtered, producing choked, rhythmic clicks before resolving in a broken English learned from intercepted broadcasts. "Mercy," the trooper rasped. "Request mercy." The sniper said nothing. He had no interest in cruelty, only truth. He stepped closer, watching the trooper's body shudder as the suit's internal systems deteriorated. The alien repeated the plea, weaker now, then extended a trembling hand toward him. The gesture carried more fear than sincerity. The sniper met it with stillness, letting the silence stretch until the trooper's desperation cracked first. "They died," the alien stammered. "Your unit?" "Recorded as entertainment. Orders from command. We follow orders." He felt the words settle over him like a heavy snowfall. He had suspected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud stripped away the last layer of restraint. Not fury, clarity. He lifted his rifle, not rushed, not trembling. The trooper's legs buckled in anticipation, but the sniper didn't fire. The cold was finishing the job more thoroughly than any bullet. The visor's cracks expanded with each panicked breath, and frost crept along the alien's throat's seal like an advancing tide. "You chose this," he finally murmured. It wasn't a condemnation. It was the truth. The trooper collapsed, the failing armor exhaling a final plume of steam as the body went still. The sniper waited a moment longer, listening for any lingering sounds of movement, but the mountain had gone quiet again. Only the wind remained. He turned away and began the slow walk back toward the place where his squad had fallen. Their dog tags hung from a branch he had set upright in the snow, a simple memorial carved in cold silence. He gathered the tags carefully, tucking them into an inner pocket where warmth still lingered. Then he activated his radio, voice steady. "Ridge is clear. Send the next team through." Static answered first, then a weary voice from command. "Understood. Reinforcements inbound." And "Good work." He looked back toward the ridge where alien laughter had once echoed. Now, it was quiet, the mountain reclaiming its dignity. The sun lifted above the peaks, scattering light across the snow in glittering shards. He stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle into him. Not as emptiness, but as completion. Then he turned toward the valley, ready for whatever came next.